On 3rd of September 1929, the US stock market was at its historic peak. But only a month later, on 29th of October 1929, the US stock market crashed by 25% on a day famously known as the Black Tuesday. And over the course of next 3 years, by 1932, the stock market crashed 89% from its peak of 1929. More than 15 million people became unemployed, and it took 25 years for the stock market to reach back to its 1929 heights. So, an important question is, are we heading towards another Great Depression? In order to predict the future, we must study the past. And in this video, I will tell you what were the main causes that led to the Great Depression and what are the similarities to the current decade of 2020. My name is Kanak and welcome back to my channel. Subscribe to my channel for interesting content from the world of finance, investing and economics. The decade of 1920 was famously known as Roaring Twenties. It was a decade of economic boom, and new technologies such as radio, refrigerators, cars and so on were making people's life easier. And people were spending money in order to buy these new technologies. As the consumer spending was increasing, factories hired more people in order to increase their production capacity. This led to a massive increase in employment and salaries of the employee. As the economy was booming, so was the stock market, and millions of people started to invest and speculate in the stock market. And banks used investor money and deposits to provide loans to people to buy the stocks. In order to finance the stock purchase, banks used the same stock as a collateral, which means if you wish to buy $100 worth of stock, the bank will finance you with $50 in return for using the same stock as collateral. This phenomena led to massive speculation in the stock market and created a bubble in the 1920s decade. Now, in order to control the speculation in the stock market, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates in 1928 and 1929, and that led to the beginning of the downfall. On 3rd of September 1929, the US stock market was at its historic peak, and only a month later, on 29th of October 1929, the stock market was down by 25% from its peak. So now the question is, what caused the Great Depression? As the stock market collapsed, people lost their savings and their purchasing power dropped dramatically. This led to a decrease in demand for the goods that were being produced in the factories, and the factories were pushed in an overproduction zone. Now, in order to tackle overproduction, factories started to reduce their production and hence cut down on the number of employees they had. This led to massive unemployment in the economy. Almost 30% of America's population was unemployed. The people who were employed were barely able to survive on their reduced salaries. Now, there were a host of factors that contributed to the Great Depression. As the stock market collapsed, people feared that the banks in which they had kept their money would also collapse, and hence they rushed to the banks to withdraw their money. This sudden withdrawal of money from the banks led to the collapse of 50% of banks in the United States. The Federal Reserve at the time did little to protect the banks and the depositors, which led to the people losing their trust in the banking system, and hence the money flowing into the banking system further reduced, which deepened the economic crisis. Not only that, but in order to protect local factories, the US government imposed heavy tariffs on imports from foreign countries. And in response, the foreign countries imposed heavy tariffs on exports from the United States. This led to a global trade war, which further deepened the global economy. Finally, in 1930s, there were droughts across different parts of United States, which caused a drop in the agricultural production. All these factors combined together caused the decade of Great Depression. And one very interesting thing to observe is that the current decade of 2020 has a lot of similarities to the decade of 1930s. A stock market euphoria followed by a sudden crash in stock market due to COVID-19, war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, Federal Reserve raising interest rate, talks of trade war between United States and China. So as you see, the 2020 decade has a lot of similarities to the 1930s. And they say history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. And if history is any guide, it is important to be cautious and watch out for what's next for the global economy.